Welcome to the UK OCR Community Podcast, presented by Obstacle Racing Media. Each episode, we'll be talking to race directors, elite runners, weekend warriors, and frankly, anyone else from the UK OCR scene that will talk to us. Here is your host, Alan, aka Muddy Duck.
Anywhere in Chicken Town. The bloody scene is bloody sad. The bloody news is bloody bad.
Well, listeners, patrons, first of all, we didn't have this as a preview episode because I was waiting until Sunday to record. And I was going to record Sunday with two athletes, hopefully the two athletes that won the first race in the Scottish OCR season of 2025, Mactuff. Unfortunately, if you were up there, then you know Mactuff got cancelled. If you weren't up there, and hope you was following UK OCR on social media, because we announced it was the first race of the season at 9:50 a.m. You know, the race was kicking off, first race of the UK in 2025, only for less than 30 minutes later to announce to you guys that it had cancelled. So today we're going to talk about how it was cancelled, why it was cancelled, and what happens next for people who attended. And I've got two people with me to talk about this. So I've got, as you all know, Simon Winstanley was. What position was you there, Simon? I know you was head marshal, was it?
Yeah, I was chief marshal on the day, so I was in charge of all the volleys out on the course, and my wife was heading up registration. We had a little bit of help from the volleys and so on as well. So
perfect. So you was right on the ground. You knew exactly what was happening. And our roving reporter for UK OCR, who's helped us out so much over in Scotland there, Martin Gemmell. Martin, welcome back.
Hello. Well, that post lasted well, didn't it? 30 minutes. It's race day. Absolutely brilliant. And I love that you were going to go and get a couple of athletes, but you've settled for Simon and I instead. Thanks, mate. Thanks, pal.
You are athletes in your own way, but different types of athletes. It was always my plan to see who won and then reach out to them yesterday, try and get them on today. And I was like, oh, no, I can't do that. So it's going to be you go. But, I mean, first of all, you were there, Martin. I'm going to come to you first. You were there, you know. You put the post on, it's all ready to go for us, you know. I loved your post because, you know, you have access to UK OCR. Turning around and saying it's the race that's so cold, you should actually shrink to fit into your finished T-shirt. What a great comment. Love that. I've been up there. I've done Mactuff several times. Not 7 times, several times. What was the conditions like when you arrived? What time did you arrive?
So we arrived bright and breezy, 8:30, along with pretty much all the other marshals. It was pretty well attended, marshal-wise. I must say thank you for everyone who did turn out. It was pretty good. A couple of new faces there as well. Mactuff has its own microclimate. If listeners want to go back and have a wee look at some of the other episodes, we listened to the other episodes, you'll hear me whittering on about that. It was low cloud, a bit of a freezing fog, to be honest. If you've never experienced freezing fog, that's interesting. As soon as you put your washers on, it can freeze across your windscreen. So if you've not got your screen wash right, it makes an interesting journey if your windscreen's not warm enough. The air temp was certainly minus. It was about -4, ranging to -6, and you really couldn't see. I mean, you know, you start in the pit and there's a control tower. You could just make out the control tower. I put an early picture on, 2 comparison pictures, because an hour later, blue skies, bit of cloud, you could see across the Forth. There was a bit of sunshine in the distance. I'm sure it was on Leith over in Edinburgh, and it was shaping up, but it was still cold, bitterly cold. Conditions wise, we're thinking about having to cancel the lollipops, which is one of it's a small, fairly straightforward water dunk obstacle, triple dipping at Mactuff, and even then it was difficult to gauge whether cracking the ice, if it was going to just reform, so later on in the day, because it's a stagnant pool, it's not running water. So conditions were treacherous underfoot, I'm not going to lie. We parked up at the volley area, which is pretty much where everyone parks up, and as soon as you go out of the car, because it's on a slight slope, you just gently, like disgraceful Bambi on ice, made it down the hill under momentum rather than any willpower. So that was a bit of a giggle to start with as you kind of slid towards the pit zone, and I was thinking, we might need a marshal out here just saying to people, just be careful. I had a laugh because I had to go back to the car with an item, and I couldn't actually get back to the car. Take 3 forward and slide backwards, and then forward again and slide backwards. So it was not easy underfoot. And anyone who knows Mactuff, the start is in the pit lane. The pit lane was a wee bit slippy itself. We'll come back to it. They did eventually get that sorted out, but the rest of the track is on a banking downhill curve. And unless you were on the grass, and even the grass was pretty slippy, because we'd really had a lot of frost. Then you get a stuff called hoarfrost on top of that. Hoarfrost doesn't start with a W. It's when water vapor freezes on something cold, and you end up with these little spikes of ice, basically. Really pretty. I urge you to do Google it. Not on a work computer, just in case you spell it wrong. But that makes things increasingly more slippy, and when it thaws on you, you get wet quicker. So with the freezing air temp and potentially people getting wet just from the conditions before they even get to the first water obstacle, it was going to look like it was going to be a pretty tough Mactuff, to be honest.
Which is the people who went up there, that's what they're wanting. I mean, I think the first one I did it, you talk about a microclimate. We went up to the hill at Knock Hill. Anyone knows it. It's a big steep hill that you run to the top. We got up there and we had perfect views before we got there. And then when you got up there, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That was the first time I did it. It has its own microclimate. You're quite right. Interesting. Where I am in Yorkshire, we've had a lot of snow today, over the night. We've had lots of snow. It's a good, I want to say 15 centimetres thick quite easily.
You would never have guessed, Alan. We've not seen it on the news or heard it on the radio or anything like that.
No,
if it happens north of the border, it's considered par for the course. But south of the border,
I'm only a little bit further south, but we have got it bad. But I'm cool with it. I've been running it this morning, so I'm cool with it. But last night I was watching the news, and on the news it talked about freezing rain. Mm-hmm. And then Dean put a post out last night. So Dean and Mactuff put a post out last night. And it sounds like this is what happened, because I'm going to read a little bit about the post. Not all of it, just little things. He said he'd been on site from 3:30 a.m. And then just before dawn, there was a very light dash of sleet just before sunrise. And effectively turned many areas of the course into an ice skating ring. This is exactly what freezing rain does. As it's falling, it goes through a cold area, and I'm going to read this off Google now, so I don't actually get it wrong. It says, rain falls through a shallow layer of cold temperature at or below 32 degrees, which is 0 degrees Celsius, we know it, and then becomes super cold, literally freezing on contact with roads, bridges, trees, power lines, and vehicles, which is what you just said, Martin. This sounds very much like what Knockhill had. It's a freak weather condition that happens, remotely. It can happen anywhere in the country, but very remotely. It happens that it came, it fell, and it was just at that time that it happened.
I think, to be honest, I think it repeated as well. So, because we had little bits of moisture throughout the morning, and then you end up with layers. You end up with this beautiful, and if you've done any kind of sort of varnishing, I'm going really off-piste here. This is terrible. Good pun though, off-piste, snowing. It's almost like, in a way, kind of sort of laminated layers of gloss varnish, and you know how shiny that gets. This is the same. That's kind of what your traditional black ice is kind of like. It's a build-up, and it doesn't take much. A couple of people running over it just super polishes it, and it's just super slippy smooth. And you might as well just be, no matter what grips you've got, you might as well be on slicks on the wet.
Oh, yeah. Simon, it says on the post, the press release that's gone out, that a member of the ambulance crew had a fall. What were you thinking at this point in time before that happened? What was the thought going through? For health and safety, through your head, through the heads of Dean and the other people who run Mactuff?
So Dean had obviously been on site since 3:30. When I arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, began reg set up and so on. The stuff was there, but Dean was actually out on site, kind of scoping the track and so on, having a look at what it was like. Lollipops was pretty much more or less a no-go from the night before. That had to kind of be checked out, so we were checking on that as well. So we knew it was going to be treacherous. There'd been Dean had told me the night before in a conversation that there'd been pretty much 3 inches of snow sat there at Knockhill for several days and freezing temperatures, with possibly expected temperatures down to about -8 overnight. Didn't get quite as low as that, but it was still pretty cold, and it was cold when we arrived. Like Martin said, when he got out the vehicle, myself and my wife, who came down with me to help out, we almost went croppers as soon as we arrived in the car park as well. I found that a little bit surprising because that's obviously Knockhill's site. This is the car park itself. And you would have expected, if Knockhill knew there was an event going on, to perhaps have gritted the car park area. But as we've kind of discussed, there is this super chilling and black ice that goes on. As you alluded to in the post, Dean said there was light sleet earlier on, and it seems as soon as it's hit the super cold ground, because there's no doubt it was cold overnight, that's just frozen on contact. The ground staff did go out and do the best and sort out the car park, and it did become easier, and they also did the pit lane. But if you think about it, Knockhill's a live track, and part of the course was actually taking in a vast amount of the track, and trying to sort of grit or de-ice or de-thaw that becomes very, very challenging. So when I spoke to Dean, and after we'd learned of the injury to the Knockhill member of staff, we were like, yeah, we're not sure this should kind of go ahead because, health and safety. If you look at it from a health and safety point of view, some of the listeners may not be aware, but up in Scotland, and I'm sure Martin can shed some more light on this, working for the ambulance service, that there's been a lot of pressure on those guys just now with the ambulances, the NHS as well. My wife works in the NHS, the hospitals, and they're just out the door with cold and influenza patients and so on. So if someone took a tumble, trying to get an ambulance out there for someone who has potentially got a serious leg break or something like that, or break dislocation, maybe worse, that's going to be challenging in itself when there's already pressure on the ambulance service, or failing which, you're perhaps going to have to get one of the whirlybirds or something out, because although there is some medics on site at Knockhill, if they're having to deal with a lot of injuries and slips and falls and so on, that's putting a load of pressure on them. So at the get-go, that was already in the back of the minds of Dean from Mactuff, myself, and also Stuart from Knockhill as well. And we're kind of uneasy. We did say, okay, we'll give it a little bit of time. It does seem to be, as Martin said, there was blue skies. Maybe see if it'll warm the track up a bit. It'll start to force some of that. But it did become clear sort of half an hour bit later on, we'd had a bit more of sort of cold, miserly stuff. And when I went out to go and find Dean on the track, who was trying to adjust some of the course, it became just how apparent we just could not go ahead. It was sheet ice on there. I had fairly grippy boots on the day, and as I was walking down off the end of the pit lane, traditionally where the rope climb is, he was there. He'd parked his transit van, but when we tried to move off to kind of come back, the transit van was just getting no purchase at all on the track. As I was trying to walk, Dean was trying to walk, there was you just couldn't tell which bits were track, which bits were black ice, and we almost ended up on our backside several times as well. So it became a no-brainer, really, in the interest of safety for our competitors, that we had to call the event and make the decision that we did in tandem with Knockhill.
I agree with that. There's a couple of things to pick up there on that one, Sam. I know you mentioned there that the car park had not been gritted and things like that. Am I right in thinking there was no event all week on there, though? So it was just the course had not been used, Knockhill had not been used for any car racing or anything like that?
I suspect that there wouldn't be any sort of driving or things at this time of year anyway. It's over the New Year period. It's been down low freezing temperatures and so on. But Dean had obviously been on site. He's been on site for 2 or 3 weeks in the lead up to sort of Christmas with a build. And then thereafter, after sort of Christmas, after he'd spent time with his family, but also he'd also been in a hospital as well and had a procedure done. So he'd been up and was trying to, check the course. And that's when things like lollipops had frozen solid. In fact, that wasn't great. The ropes had been thawed or been out getting thawed, and then they just completely frozen solid again. So the night before, rope climb health and safety, that was removed straight away. So there was amendments and stuff going on the night before, and in the lead up to the event, I was constantly briefing our marshals, please make sure you bring something warm. It is going to be cold. It is going to be challenging. You're going to be out on course all day. And then when I got there on site, because obviously I'm up in Aberdeen, when I got there on site in the morning, it became just how clear, how challenging that was going to be. And, the event just was not going to be safe.
No, I get that. But I was going to go back to the gritting. If Knockalladu gritted, it wouldn't have worked either, because as Martin, I'm sure Martin will agree with this, but to grit, you've got to have cars travelling over the grit to spread it, to squash it, to make it melt with the snow, because it heats the snow up in theory. And obviously no cars on site wouldn't have helped that car park, would it, Martin?
No. I was a wee bit annoyed that it hadn't been gritted the night before, I'll be honest. I made some comment to that on the Saturday. They've known this event was coming up. Had this been sort of one of the car events, one of the motorsports events that they'd had up, I suspect the place would have been sort of more heavily gritted. But you're absolutely right. It kind of, with hindsight, was sort of retrospectively, I suppose, if you'd gritted the night before, you would have had to have driven round. That's absolutely fine. But out on the track, runners aren't going to do enough to debar that. And to be honest, the temp was so low that because the grit's just sitting there, it's just going to freeze around it. I know that might not make sense to a lot of sort of maybe our more southern listeners, but you're right. Grit doesn't melt the ice itself. You don't just spread grit; it needs trampled down. It needs pushed in, and there needs to be a certain amount of that. And if you don't get it down early enough, it's absolutely pointless. And I honestly think it was 100% the right call, simply because we couldn't predict what the weather was going to be like an hour afterwards. It had already cleared, but as we were packing up, the cloud was already coming down again, and there was a bit of what we call smurf, which is kind of like a very light rain. You can't really, you just kind of feel it, but and it's there, and you're wondering how am I getting damp? It's almost like that really fine spray that you get, and you could almost see ice crystals at times in the air, and because you're on and off the track, if it had just been at the start, that would have been fine, but you're back on the track later on and back again, and it crisscrosses and you finish on the track, so there's absolutely no guarantee. And if I can touch a wee bit on things like liability, I did see a couple of comments about liability waivers, and surely you should have just gone ahead because everyone signs a liability waiver. Liability and negligence are two different things, and if that had gone ahead, it would have been a negligent action, because it's something that could have been prevented by stopping the race or by different conditions. So the liability is fine. It does rest with the runner saying, I'm absolutely fine with this, I'll take the risk. But there's an aspect of negligence that would have fallen on both Knockhill and Mactuff themselves. And as we're saying, because one of the members of staff already had been wiped out, you potentially could easily have been overwhelmed with people sitting there. I had enough concerns that I asked Simon if I could interject with the Marshall's briefing and give a little bit about hypothermia and how to treat hypothermia out on course and what you do and you don't do. Because I was just a wee bit twitchy about that. And it's, I'm a fairly relaxed person, I think. I mean, there are times when I get a wee bit uptight about this, and that was one of them, was that I did feel that it was enough that if people were in water immersion, because as you say, Mactuff, I've always said it's the most organic OCR I've ever been to. The course is the obstacle, and you're in and out of streams, you're in and out of the so different obstacles, and it's just part of the course, whether you're doing the lollipops or not, it's wet enough. And if that freezes to you, we went round once, and we Jill that used to run with us carried a flag, and the flag was frozen solid by the time we got back. I mean, it was out frozen. You could have snapped the damn thing. Imagine that had been a piece of clothing stuck to you. There's just getting warm again afterwards, really, really difficult. And the last thing we needed was to overwhelm sort of local resources. And I think Simon's spot on with that. There was a whole wider picture beyond a simple liability waiver.
Well,
Could I also jump in there as well? So Martin's spot on with that as well. But in the back of my mind as well is what a lot of people won't be aware of is that this was also actually a qualifier race as well. And we couldn't ensure fairness of competition or whatever. It wouldn't have been the same kind of race. Yeah, people are signing a waiver or whatever saying, yeah, I'm happy to go ahead. I'm happy to take the risk. But you can't ensure fairness of competition or whatever. Yeah, everyone's having to deal with the same conditions or whatever, but you're not getting the same kind of event that you would kind of expect or fairness qualifying and what have you. And that also was in the back of our minds as well. This is a qualifying event. It's also a championship event. How are we going to feel if we don't take the decision to call it, the race goes ahead, and someone's sitting there thinking, I'm not happy with this decision, but goes ahead anyway, takes a spill, a tumble, fractures something or whatever. That's their season done with. Months of rehabilitation or whatever. So it absolutely needed to be made, that decision, in the interests of health and safety and also well-being to the competitors as well. And that was absolutely in the back of mine and Dean's and everybody's mind as well, because we are very early on in the season. It's the first one of the year. So,
but for me, I would say, honestly, Simon, if it was even in the middle of the year, I think the right decision was made. The reason being is that you're right, quite right. People are athletes and they want to complete the whole season, but we've also got jobs. 99% of people that rock up to these events have got jobs. And if you break a leg, break an arm, injure yourself, you could be out of work for however long it takes you to recover. And I guess that's the worst thing that's always worried me doing these things. And that's why I've always had insurance that pays me if I come out of work. It only pays me 50% of my wages, but I get something back, if I'm out of work, because that is the biggest thing. This is a dangerous sport. We've got to remember this. This is a dangerous sport. Whatever you do, there's a risk involved in it. That risk has got to be mitigated by the race directors. And in this instance, Dean made the right decision. One of the big factors for me, and I'm going to ask you on this one, Simon, is that in what's been released, it actually says it was an ambulance crew member that fell. Therefore, that, from a race director's point of view, you're taking one ambulance crew member away. Whether they had to actually be taken to hospital by the ambulance or not, I'm not sure. Can you allude on that?
I absolutely can. I saw the ambulance going away, and you would think, in the vicinity of Edinburgh, right, we're going to send them to Edinburgh. No, they didn't. They sent them 60 miles further north to Nine Wells. That's Dundee. Edinburgh's actually closer, but they didn't send them to Edinburgh. He was taken away in an ambulance to Nine Wells to get checked. And that was him just walking across to the medic centre and actually gone across, whacked his head. And having spoken to Dean, who had a sit down with Stuart from Knockhill, he reviewed the CCTV. And this guy was out for 7 seconds. There was no movement whatsoever. He was out. He was unconscious.
Wow.
When someone's taken a heavy spill like that, you then have to seriously take a long, hard look and is this worth it? And it absolutely wasn't. He could have potentially had serious head injuries, could have had fractured his skull. Thankfully, none of this has happened. I've heard back that he's fine, he's well, and he just needs to be checked for or follow concussion protocol. But he was exceedingly lucky. That could have been a hell of a lot worse.
It certainly could have. But as a race, you're now down two ambulance crew, an ambulance crew where there were 2 or 3 people in there, and an ambulance, an emergency vehicle to get to wherever they need to get to. So I mean, I don't know how many they have. I would imagine that a race like this would have 2 or even 3 emergency, but you're now either 33% or 50% down. That then puts every athlete's life at risk. And I'm going to use the word life because we just mentioned there about hypothermia and what Martin got to. I know the first Mactuff I did, I would say 90% of people came down with hypothermia. I missed the second one and I went back to the third one. And in the third one, I'm going to say another 90% came down with hypothermia, me included, but both of them. Only mild for myself, I was used to it, but there were people there in cotton shirts, there were people there, in completely wrong gear doing it, and they were coming down with hypothermia. And these ambulance crew have got to deal with it. That's why they have a specialist team on site that will have had a tent or a medic centre where they could put them, warm them up and all of that. But they're going to deal with so much of that. And even if there was two on there, it's not enough. 3 is probably the minimum you would go with anyway. You know what I mean? And I can get that from a race director's point of view. I fully agree. You've got to have as many people on site. If I, at my race, if mine went down by 50%, I would seriously have to cancel my race. We have 6 on site. We have 6 medics on site, 2 paramedics and 4 first aiders. That's what we have to do with ours for our insurance. But if that went down, if 2 of them first aiders went down, or if both of them 2 paramedics went down, the race would have to be cancelled. And in this instance, this is the right decision to do. I'm so glad they're all right. Was it a man or a woman?
It was a man. Yeah.
So I'm glad he's all right then. Irrelevant to which he was, I wouldn't wish him or she. I would say he's all right or she's all right. So he's all right, which is absolutely brilliant. I want to move on to when it cancelled. So Dean went and briefed everyone. What was his thought? Because this is like unheard of. This is going to be one of the first times I've actually heard of an event actually being cancelled when the athletes are there. What was going through his mind? Can you give us an insight in that?
Yeah. Dean was obviously kind of conflicted, obviously trying to build up Mactuff again because he's obviously taken it over. He's obviously, in the back of his mind, he's still wanting it to go ahead. He's obviously got overheads, but at the same time, he's thinking, I'm letting these people down, but I've got to make this call. I've got to make it for their safety. Dean, a lot of guys will probably say that Dean comes across a bit gruff or whatever. I've got to know Dean quite well over the last sort of 18 months. And although he maybe has this gruff exterior, he's one of the most genuinely nice guys that you would probably meet. He has the best interests of people at heart. And he was genuinely disappointed. I sat with him at the end, and you could just see everything had just kind of been sucked out of him. But when he'd had a chance to sort of come to, and we sat down later, he was adamant that it was the right call. And he said it was actually myself that had to make the announcement jointly with Stuart from Knock Hill. And that was purely and simply, for the listeners that don't know, there was rumours of people were actually turning up at the gates of Knock Hill, and the people on the gates were actually telling them to go away. The event had been cancelled. Dean said categorically, once that decision had been made together with Knock Hill, he 100% did not want that. He wanted them to come into registration, and he wanted them to go home to hear it from him, and to go home with a medal and also their T-shirt as well. Now, that's obviously an expense to him as well, but he wanted that. He felt he owed it to the people who'd signed up to the race. He also felt that they should hear it from him and what their options would be as well. So his first concern was to the people who were turning up, who'd actually put money in his pocket, which he's obviously now going to be out of because, as you'll come on to, the list of options, he's actually deferring the entries to everyone who turned up on the day. So, he was devastated. He was heartbroken, but he felt he wanted to make that announcement himself. So at the time I made the announcement, he was actually up at the gates speaking to the staff and saying, "What, can you let people come in? I don't want them turned away. I want them to hear it from me and to actually get their swag." It's kind of unheard of. Oh, you've not done the race, you need getting your swag. But actually, that you'll have seen, or the listeners will have seen, people from Sweden, Germany, and all over came to the event. So they've obviously put in a big financial expense to kind of come and attend the event. So it's only right and fair that they should get something for actually doing that.
Completely agree. Completely agree. He couldn't have done no more than he's done. And I know people, I've seen one or two comments. I've travelled and I've paid for hotels and I've done X, Y, and Z. That's great if you're one of those people that's listening. But just bear in mind, if you had been out there and you had have got injured, how would you have felt? Because you would be out of work. So just think about that, guys. For my opinion, the right decision was made. I'm going to go through a list of options out there unless any of you guys have got anything else to add on that before I go through a list of whatever options.
Yeah, I'd love to just jump in. As someone that was kind of watching the proceedings and just chatting to people, there were a lot of participants there that I hadn't seen before, and I spoke with a group from Dalkeith women's rugby team who were there en masse, 15 of them, never done OCR before, signed up for Mactuff, 15k, were, to quote James Burton's use of the word, petrified, perfectly appointed word, but were still there and had pitched up. And if one of them had gotten injured, fine, there's a big crowd of them, but if you've turned up on your own and you've driven, how are you getting home? So if you're James Burton that's taking an Uber after flying up, how are you getting home from the local hospital? Kirkcaldy, just to touch on that actually, Fife has a fairly major hospital, but there are certain things it doesn't do. So there are major trauma centres, and the nearest one, your choices are either Edinburgh or Tayside, and they're in two different health boards. And there is someone who works in I suppose management now, as well as healthcare. It's a tough decision to take someone past a major hospital to go because they need a CT and, head injury scans, and it's not just concussions. It's what do you do afterwards when you find that? You're as well just bypassing, going straight to the trauma centre than getting someone looked at on the off chance they might be okay and can be treated by that hospital. So a lot of really big decisions. Dean's in a no-win position at that point. He either puts the race on and someone gets injured, or he doesn't and people whinge. And I know what's the better thing out of that. Again, 100% the right decision for me.
Completely agree. So your options are, if you've been and you haven't seen it yet, you've got quite a lot to choose from. You can defer your tickets. So in April, there are 3 events: the southeast of England, which I do believe is in Pippingford. I think it's more of a mud run than an OCR, but we'll wait and see. Sunday 13th, which is in West Yorkshire, a place called, it says Bradford on here. It's actually just outside Bradford, and it is a place where there used to be something called the Pain Barrier. Been there quite a few times. It's an amazing course. It's an off-road motorbike stroke 4x4 track. There is some amazing hills to run up and down. I remember going there as a pain barrier and running through, where the tyres just make a little groove. It was like literally 2 foot deep in water in the middle of winter. So it's a great muddy event there. I think I'm going to go to that one. So that's Sunday 13th of April. Sunday 27th, Carnoustie in Scotland, Barry Mudden Half Marathon. So something a bit different there. May, you've got May 3rd, Knockhill 5 Mactuff Spring. Saturday 3rd, 4th, and Sunday 11th, Knockhill 5 again, Mactuff Kids. Sunday 18th, Aberdeen, Scotland, a really muddy run at Castle Fraser. September, date to be confirmed, but back at Knockhill for a muddy fun run. October, Carnoustie, Scotland for Barry Budden 10s, which is a 10k or a 10-mile event. November, possibly the 2nd of November, at Sherwood in Nottingham, England, Sherwood Trail Half Marathon. Great place down in Sherwood. I know exactly where they're going to be doing this. And it used to be a place where Dash the Titan used to be. So everyone knows Dash the Titan. It was run around there. Great venue to run at. So keep an eye on that one. And then obviously you can go back to January 2026 and go back up to Mactuff if you want to go and do it, which looks like it's going to be the 11th of January next year.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to jump in. It won't be as early next year. It'll be the second weekend in January. Having spoken with Dean today, he's openly admitted, yeah, he tried something different with trying to go to the Saturday this year. I'm not sure whether it'll be the Saturday or he'll revert back to the Sunday next year. There's positives to both. The Saturday this year allowed people to travel back after having completed it, get back for work and so on. But what will happen there in terms of date next year will be TBC from Dean. But because, as you'll have seen, or the listeners may have seen by now, and as you alluded to, Dean's posted a video today. The snow's actually crunchy underfoot. The ice isn't actually there. So had we have stuck with the Sunday, then the race would have been held, and you wouldn't have had two athletes that are one vowel away from fit.
Your own jokes. That said, travelling today a little bit tougher for people because of the weather conditions. So it probably would have gone ahead, but I'm not sure people would have gotten to Knockhill or been able to. I'm a fan of the Sunday, especially when there's football on the Saturday as well. But I mean, if he's holding it a week later, brilliant. I mean, it'll be tropical by then. Second week in January, absolutely, mate. Taps off.
I can't stop laughing at that. I love the word tropical because it's going to be above 0 degrees up in Scotland. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking to me. I'm going to leave it to you first. What do you want to finish off with, Martin?
Just keep coming to OCR. Little things like this happen. Don't let it discourage you. I'll be honest, there were a lot of relieved faces when they said it was good. There was a lot of people going, "Oh well, what a shame. I'm off to Dobie's for breakfast. Bye." The spirit was great. We went to a famous Canadian coffee donut place nearby that rhymes with Morton's, and it was great. There was a whole crowd there, and it was just absolutely brilliant. There was a really good sort of atmosphere there. So, people don't get discouraged. Don't be discouraged by some of the negative comments. I suspect that some of them were from people that didn't have the balls to turn up in the first place and just wanted to moan. But yeah, just keep coming to OCR. Things like this happen. It is quite a dangerous sport at the end of the day when you think about it, and there's a lot out with people's control. So yeah, absolutely. Don't let it dampen your spirits or leave you out in the cold.
Simon?
Absolutely agree with everything that Martin said. Don't let it discourage you. Mactuff is great in January. I've done it a couple of times myself. It is a great course. It is quite challenging in terms of the microclimate and stuff. But don't hate on Mactuff. They made the decision in your best interest at the end of the day. And you do need to continue to support events like this. Dean's taken the hit on this one. He's done it in your best interest. Some people alluded to on last night, I'll happily pay again for my entry. It's gestures like that which are appreciated. I'm not saying you have to do that, but do continue to come out and support the events, and do please give Dean feedback or support. He is willing to listen to it and take it on board. He is trying to grow this, and for listeners in Scotland, we don't have very many OCR events, so so be pleased that we actually have this put on for us. And if you don't turn out for it, we're not going to have OCR events for much longer.
Yeah. And if I can chip in terms of injury and stuff like that, and you're struggling to get insurance, join BOSS, join British Obstacle Sports. You get race insurance with that.
Exactly. And on that, listeners, thank you to my two guests, Simon and Martin, for joining me. Martin, you can have a bit of time off now until the next race up in Scotland before you're back reviewing it for us. In the meantime, listener, you take care, you stay safe, and you keep on running, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care. Bye.
I don't know what you want. Let's have a bit of fun till I die.
Thank you for listening to the UK OCR podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to our podcast today. If you like what we do, please think about joining our Patreon. It only costs £2 a month, and it goes to help supporting us to put these podcasts on. Or, if you fancy a one-off payment, just buy us a beer. The links to both are in the description. In the meantime, You stay safe and you keep on running, everyone, and I'm sure we'll see you on the course soon. Take care. Bye.